speaking with us about the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance, as well as the recent ICAAN transition that has taken place, and internet governance in general. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Can you all hear me in the back? So, firstly, thank you to all of you for having me here. And Anna has been very diligent and persistent all at the same time in making sure that I show up. So, one round of applause for her. And you're going to help me with. Thank you so much. So, one of the hallmarks of the multi-stakeholder model is nobody is on a pedestal. So that's why I'm standing below over here. I'm not off the stage. So Anna's been to a ICAAN meeting. You would have noticed that there is no podium. And that is what the community wanted. That everybody is the same visually in terms of optics. But there's more to the multi-stakeholder model than optics. So today what I'm going to do is talk to you about the origins of the multi-stakeholder model in terms of internet governance. Now, the concept of multi-stakeholderism may exist or does exist in various forms of governance or for governing various activities or industries. But undoubtedly, when it comes to internet governance, it has proven to be a very powerful process. All of you are students of law, and you must have done enough courses related to governance. And then you can draw your own inferences around how one system compares against the other. And I can help you with some Q&A later in the talk. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a bunch of slides. There's a lot of content. I would request you to look at the screen. However, don't try to read everything because it's just going to be a lot to absorb. Just follow what I'm saying. I'm going to leave the deck behind, and you can take a look at it later. And if you have any follow-up questions, even beyond today's program, please feel free to get in touch. So starting off, where is the internet today? Which is the level of penetration? This is a study which came out in January of this year. As you can see, 50% of the world's population now has access to the internet. Okay. Now, the challenge over here there's an opportunity and a challenge. The great thing is that you can turn around and say, over the last 20, 30 years, 50% of the world has is connected to the internet. The challenge over here is the internet today runs on Latin script mostly. Where you and I use the internet, we use the English language, and the script that is used is Latin script. We're running out of people who can speak and talk in English. When you look at this map, the future of the internet is going to be in regional, local languages. And that's where the technology space is working on. Today, my presentation is not about the future, but it is important for you to know this because, again, it is a multi-stakeholder process that will enable other people who are not connected, or let's say they're unconnected, to be connected over the next 5 to 7 years. Next slide. So the definition of the multi-stakeholder model came about only in 2003, and it came through a United Nations process And we will, what I'm going to cover subsequently is, what led to the pressure on the United Nations to recognize the internet as a very important development for social, or rather important tool for social development. So in 2003, they defined the working group on internet governance, defined multi-stakeholder model as the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that share the evolution and the use of the internet. Okay. Now, the fundamentals of the multi-stakeholder model is very simple. It is that you aspire to reach goals that would be unachievable if each stakeholder worked separately and individually on these goals. And particularly to the internet works because it is one single internet. Okay. Now, how many of you come from a tech background? Like, you can be a little more confident. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, do you have some idea of networks? Some idea. Some is good enough. So, you can actually create networks everywhere. There can be a network on this campus. Kakatiya University can have a network of their own. Osmania University can have another network. But if these networks didn't speak to each other, it would not be the network of networks. And that's what exactly the internet is. Internet is nothing but the network of networks. Okay. And this process of multi-stakeholderism got ingrained in the development of the internet very early on. It was only in 2003 that the definition came out. So what I'm going to talk about now is how and when did this start? Okay. So we're talking about the origins and development of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. It all started on 7th April 1969, and I can assure you, I'm pretty much assured that none of you were on this planet at that time. Okay. I was at Shorts. So, what you see here, you can get this paper online. You can just Google RFC1 and Steve Crocker, and you will come to a PDF document which you can read. But essentially, Steve Crocker happens to be the chairman of ICAAN currently, and he was a research professor at UCLA, University of California in Los Angeles, and he had developed a software called INP. Okay, and basically it was a message processing software. He called it message processing. And what this document does, and if you go through we're not going to go through the document, but if you go through the document, it explains how this message processing will take place, okay, or can take place. And if you look at the title, it says Network Working Group Request for Comment. So he had created a group of cohorts, other researchers. Some of them were on his campus, some were at other campuses. And all he was doing is he typed up a document. This is actual, manual typewriter typing, okay, in which he asked for comments, and you can see his request for comment 0001 in a sense. It's the first ever RFC. Now, what this did was it helped create a certain set of protocols related to this IMP software. And there was some debate which went back and forth over a few months, and people met up in an academic environment, and so on and so forth, and they created a way by which packets of data would go from one computer to another using the telecommunication line. And so how should a packet be defined? What is the header of a packet? What is the body of the packet? What is the footer of a packet? How large can a packet be? All of these set of rules, and which are also called protocols, were created. Okay. We move on. So all of this was happening in University of Southern California mostly. Now, I'm going to stop here and rewind the clock even further. So we were talking about 1969, but I'm going to take you back to 1957, 1958. I don't have a slide of this, but at that time, the Russians put out a rocket called the Sputnik. Okay, some of you would have heard of the Sputnik. Now, what did the Sputnik do? Has anybody read what the Sputnik did? All it did was, it was shot into space and it orbited the Earth. Okay? It was to prove that you can send a rocket to space successfully. And create a geolocation so that it can keep spinning around. Okay? But the second thing it did was, and this was very interesting, was it sent back signals on the shortwave radio channel. That's the way you have FM radio. Before FM was created, there was, and there still is, shortwave radio frequency. It sent back signals on shortwave channel. And it was utter gibberish, this signal. I mean, there was no messaging in the signal, but it was seen as messaging by the United States government, which had by then entered some kind of a Cold War situation with the Russians, and they set up. They realized that the Russians were moving ahead on technology. They had sent a rocket to orbit the Earth, and the rocket would send back signals. So there's a lot of stuff happening. So they set up an institution called DARPA, okay, which was set up in the early 60s. Okay. Basically, Department of Advanced Research Projects. And Dr. Steve Crocker, who I talked about in the last slide, was one of the researchers who was hired at DARPA, along with 2-3 other people whose names you can now see, to work on various projects. And one of the projects they started working on was this packet switching of data. So by 1969, they had connected, as you can see, 4 universities, 3 of which were on the West Coast. The Stanford Research Institute, University of Southern California, University of California in LA, and then later the University of Utah. And if you hit, by 1973, they had extended this networking to the East Coast, various places, and had even gone all the way to London. Okay. And this process was not something that DARPA had even planned on in a sense, but a lot of these university professors were collaborating with each other and connecting their computers on a network using certain set of protocols, rules that were created in that first RFC paper that you've seen. Okay, so this was in a sense the beginning of a multi-stakeholderism for internet governance. We have to be very narrow in our definition here. I don't want to talk about multi-stakeholder model for anything else, but in internet governance, these were all individuals representing different universities, doing research projects, and connecting, creating a network, and in a sense it became a network of networks. Okay. So we'll run through some timelines, so by 1971, you had email. I lived in the US in the 80s. There was no browser, but I could send an email. I had a network within my university, and I had a network when I went to work there. I had a network within my company offices, and we could send email to each other. We had very rudimentary database management systems. No browser, no user interface which made things easy, no attachments possible. Okay. By 1974, now remember these two names, just like I talked about Steve Crocker. These two gentlemen, Robert Kahn and Vint Cerf, some of you may have heard of Vint Cerf, created TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. This became the standard definition protocol for the internet. Okay, so the INP software, which was created in '69, by '74 had become into a rigorously tested, standardized, mode of, creating networks. Okay. It took another 15 years for Tim Berners-Lee, who is British, to create the World Wide Web. And once the www was created, within a few years, browsers started coming up. One of the first browsers was Mosaic, and then after Netscape, Navigator and Yahoo. 1995, Microsoft launched the Internet Explorer. 96, Hotmail, was a program that they bought from an Indian IT geek called Sabir Bhatia, and created free mail service. 1998, 3 major incidents took place. 2 are mentioned on this slide, and the third, I understand, NASA was one. So we all shared a common date in history. Okay, so Google was founded. ICAAN was incorporated in California, and ICAAN's limit I will talk of later. But there's another name attached there, John Foster, and the only thing he was doing at that time was simply keeping track of the numbers, the IP address. You're familiar with IP address, I would imagine, right? So he had created the IP system, but now that he had created it, he had to run it. Okay? And the uniqueness of the internet, as you will see and you possibly know, is there's a unique IP address with a unique name that creates the domain name system, okay? With a set of protocols attached to both. So John Foster is one of the founding fathers of the internet and ICANN. And unfortunately, he did not live long. I mean, he died at the age of 47 after the creation of ICANN. Excellent. So various things happened through this following period. But in 2003 is when the World Summit of Information Society took place in Geneva, and that's where the definition of the multi-stakeholder model that we started with happened. So what I'm trying to capture for you guys over here is that it took a long time for a definition to be put or fixed on internet governance, because people were just collaborating freely amongst themselves, building consensus and building technology. Okay, and obviously in 1998, one of the other things that happened was this whole collaborative process, as you saw, belonged to DARPA for the longest time, and that was a US government/military kind of project. When the browser got created, private companies wanted to, build businesses on it, and And that's when, in 1998, when ICAAN was created, it came as an act of US government for the internet to be opened up, and therefore ICAAN was created through that process. Okay, and another company called Network Solutions was created, which actually so ICAAN was created as a non-profit organization, and Network Solutions was created as a profit-making organization. That's where you would buy .com, .net, and various other extensions, or names on various other extensions. So 2003 is when the VISIS took place in Geneva. It was a contentious kind of meeting because people, a lot of countries participated, and there was no consensus on how an internet governance model ought to run, but they promised to meet in 2005. And this meeting in 2005 was held in Tunis. That meeting resulted in what is known as the Tunis Agenda. You can Google this, you'll find this document, which has been the backbone of various governments' internet-related IT policies. So the government of India also drew its inspiration around internet governance from the Tunis Agenda, and various governments did. So there was an understanding or an acceptance in the multilateral world of the United Nations that the internet needs to be governed differently, and within the UN structure there needs to be a multi-stakeholder mechanism for the internet, and that was the VISIS, out of which comes the IGF and all of that. Okay. So, from 2006, as you've seen, various, you can go to the next slide. Social media picked up, and by 2014, the number of internet users had reached 3 billion, and last year, in 2016, on 30th September, rather on 1st October 2016, the US government's role in ICAAN ceased to exist. ICAAN became free of any government oversight. It became totally, truly multi-stakeholder. Okay, and we'll talk more about it as we go. Next. So, what I tried to capture in the previous slide is what I call the spirit of multi-stakeholderism. And what are some of the hallmarks? The multi-stakeholder model has been born from collaborative efforts in peacetime, unlike the United Nations, which rose out of World War II. Number two is initially developed by free-spirited geeks. They were working on a government project, but they were collaborating amongst themselves. Number three is this model is driven by barrierless, fast-paced innovation and consensus. Consensus is key over here. Okay. And number four is this model readily engages with other models. It's not it's not a utopian concept. It does not exist in its own sphere. It is happy to engage outside its own system. The heading of the right-hand column has disappeared, but what it says is challenges, which you can't see. So the multi-stakeholder model could mean different things to different people. And I'll give you an example. Last year or 2 years ago, when the government of India espoused the multi-stakeholder model, they felt that they needed to promote multi-stakeholderism, and they need to call meetings. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but the fact is, various other stakeholders also needed to play their part. You can't have one institution, pushing an agenda and others not also reciprocating. Multi-stakeholderism can be mistaken for lack of leadership if consensus is difficult, and if it is not well defined or well sort of designed, it could lead to capture. When I say capture, I mean certain stakeholders get to run it in a certain manner without engagement of other stakeholders. Multi-stakeholderism is always under some challenge. And the current challenges are as follows. There's rising nationalism in various parts of the world. We've seen this with Brexit. We've seen it with the US elections. We've seen a bit of it in the APAC region. So there is a sense of nationalism that is, in a sense, seen as anti-globalization. Okay? And this sense of nationalism leads to greater pressure for governments to become more or try to be more dominant in this space. And lastly, in terms of pure technology, there are new technologies which are coming up in the identifier space. DOA is one, Namecoin is another. Now these are all technologies which could become part of the DNS system or could be a parallel to the DNS system. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that the DNS system will just collapse and go away. It only means that there would be a different kind of sort of management required of integrating all of this together. Next. So, this slide is pretty intense, but I've taken this from Joseph Nye and his fairly seminal work called the Regime Complex for Managing Global Cyber Activities. What it does is show you how the multi-stakeholder institutions work in collaboration with multilateral institutions. Okay? Now, if you see at the core of the diagram, you have, and this is related to global cyber activities as he calls it, you have the international policy standard, and you see ICAAN, IANA, ISOP, RIRs, and then the technical standards are by IETF, World Wide Web Consortium, and the Internet Advisory Board. But around it, you see various regional organizations. The ITU is a very major telecom regime which is part of the United Nations system. In fact, the ITU was subsumed into the United Nations system. It was in existence before the UN came into existence. There are various government groupings. There are intellectual property regimes that exist globally. There are law enforcement cooperation agreements, intellectual community, intelligence community alliances. So there are various kinds of regimes, governance regimes that are prevalent. But in the center of it is the multi-stakeholder model, which is interacting with all of this, or all these various other regimes. What is important to note is the multi-stakeholder model is not an easy process. It is a process which needs to build consensus, which means there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of sometimes disagreement, oftentimes disagreement, but the idea is to create, to solve a challenge or a problem with a common perspective in mind. Okay, so that is the whole idea behind it. Next. So ICAAN is sort of one of the examples of the multi-stakeholder system, and since I work with ICAAN, I'm going to talk to you about how the ICAAN multi-stakeholder model works, both within the ICAAN system and how it engages with institutions outside the ICAAN system. So What is ICAAN's mission? The mission of ICAAN is to ensure the stable and secure operation of the Internet's unique identifier system. So when we say unique identifier system, we are talking about the DNS, okay, the domain name system, which includes domain names, numbers, and the protocol parameters, or conventions, rules, or whatever you want to call them, but technically they're known as protocol parameters, which bind the names and numbers. Okay. So just and you can read through these specific mission statements. We can talk about that separately later. But the real issue over here is what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve a very simple thing, seemingly very simple thing. When you go online and you open a browser and you type in www.google.in or google.com, you should reach that website. You should not go to bing.com when you type Google. Okay? It's fundamentally that simple. That's all we're trying to do. Okay? The other thing we're trying to do is when you search for certain terms online, those words, those terminologies, the script should be recognized by the internet search engines. Okay. So, and therefore there has to be some common parameters for all of this to work. Now, if you were to read the left-hand column, you'll see, we allocate and assign the names in the root zone of the DNS. We coordinate the development and the implementation of policies concerning the registration of second-level, top-level domains, facilitate the coordination and operation and evolution of the DNS system, coordinate the Internet protocol numbers. So there are various things that we do related to the DNS system. Okay? In performing its mission, ICAAN will act in a manner that complies with and reflects ICAAN's commitment and respects ICAAN core values. And what are the core values? Preserving and enhancing stability, security, and resiliency and openness of the DNS. This is the corest of core values. We call it SSR, security, stability, and resiliency and the openness of the DNS system, which means that whenever you go online, if your telecom network is working, you should be able to use it. Okay. Number two is employing open, transparent, and bottom-up multi-stakeholder policy development processes that are led by the private sector. In other words, no government should be able to control the process. It should be in the hands of the private sector. And number three is operating with efficiency and excellence in a fiscally responsible and accountable manner. That is a direct responsibility for ICAAN organization. That is the staff of ICAAN, in how we perform our duties. Okay, next. So, what we do in more specific terms, we connect, we work with our partners such as the Internet Engineering Task Force or the W3C we use the protocol parameters that they've devised for the Internet, and we run the DNS, which includes the names, numbers, and certain protocol parameters. Next slide. ICAAN is constituted of three elements: the community, the board, and organization or staff. The community is, yourselves, all of you are part of the community, but there are other community groupings as well. I have another slide that will show the groupings. The board is elected by the community. Various community groups have, they elect their members to the board. And then the organization is such as myself, where we do not create policies, but we run the process of implementing the policies that the community and the board creates. Next. So I'll leave these slides with you, but it talks about who is a community member, what does the community do, and how do we do it. The next slide is a little more important. If you look at how the community, there are two parts to this slide. Firstly, what are the community groupings and how policy is created. So on the left-hand side, on the left-hand axis, the y-axis, you have the 3 core community groups which have voting powers. Okay, it is the address supporting organization (ASOs), the country code name supporting organization (CCNSO). So that is, like a .in, Government of India, or .us, the US government. And then generic names supporting organizations. So the GNSO includes the private sector companies, it includes ISPs, it includes the intellectual property, legal community, all of these, and also the non-profit sector is part of that group. At the x-axis below, you have all the advisory committees that participate in the process, but they don't have, sort of voting options. So the at-large advisory committee, which is the at-large structure, which is one of the largest powerful structure in terms of users. So typically Internet Society chapters across the world are part of the at-large organization. Your university can become a regional at-large structure. Security and Stability Advisory Committee. This is a committee of experts related to the root zone operations. Currently, we have 3 Indian individuals who are part of, my apologies. Security and Stability is related to the root zone. We don't have any Indian participation yet there. But in the next committee, Root Server System Advisory Committee, all the root operators are members, and then there is a caucus of experts. There are 3 Indians who are, on that. And then, of course, there is the Government Advisory Committee. There are 170 governments participating in ICAAN. Now, the middle of the chart or this slide shows you how policy making is done. So typically, issue identification happens from the communities on the left-hand side, and they initiate a policy development process. And there's a call for volunteers, so on and so forth, and then it comes for review by the advisory committees. And there's a public consultation process, and this is all the working of the multi-stakeholder model. Sometimes this process of creating policy could go up to 6 to 7 years. Have you heard of new GTLDs? For example, State Bank has moved to .sbi. So that .sbi is a new generic top-level domain. There are about 1,800 such new GTLDs, like a .club or a .tech. And then there are companies which have got their own, like Samsung, Sony, SBI, Dabur. Okay. So the policy around getting, to create a system to allow this to happen took almost 7 years in the making through the multi-stakeholder process. So the multi-stakeholder process can be very frustrating if you look at it in a different way, because it took 7 years and many meetings, many iterations of the policy document for it to get created. ICAAN board, again made up of the community members. The key function is to provide strategic oversight of the organization and act so that make sure that we act within our mission. Okay? And lastly, the ICAAN organization, which is led by my CEO. He also is a member of the board. And our remit is to implement the community's recommendations at the direction of the board under the supervision of the CEO within ICAAN's mission and scope. So it's a very narrow remit. Okay? The fact that I'm here today is very well documented and recorded in our internal system that I've come to this campus, and this is what I'm talking about. Okay? Because when we have our public meetings 3 times a year, anyone can go up to the mic and say that, Samiran Gupta went to the Nalsar campus and he was talking about rocket science. And, he wasted the public's money doing that. Okay? So, I am open to question at every level. So finally, some of what we do, there is a very hard technical part, which is the lower 3 boxes: protocol parameters, internet IP addresses, and root zone management. And there are other related things that we do, which include the DNS, coordinating the DNS, policy development, propagating the L root, which is the root server system which runs the internet. Okay, supporting and growing the community, which is what I am hopefully doing today, and also supporting, the development of country code top level domains and the generic top level domains. Again, I'm going to leave this slide and take back. You can look at it and read it in more details. The IANA functions that we do, Internet assigned names, authority functions, existed even before ICAAN was created. It existed through DARPA. It got subsumed into ICAAN, and we continue to do that. And this is the function that the US government had oversight of till September 2016, but which is now free of that oversight. Oversight is now through the multi-stakeholder model. Next. This shows how the numbers are distributed. We won't stay here. Go on. Don't bother reading this slide. It should be printed out on an A3 sheet, but it actually demystifies the root zone system of the internet in easy English language. But I'm going to leave this with you. You can read it later. But essentially, I will just paraphrase this for you. When the internet was created, there were 2 or 3 root servers. Okay. Now, if I had a server in Delhi and Nalsar had a server, and both were infected by virus, or there was a malicious attack on both of them, or physically there was no power, then the internet would go down because they both servers would go out. Okay. So what has happened is, over the years, the technology has changed. That you can, although there were originally 13 root servers, there are now instances of these servers across the globe. There are about 600 odd servers across the globe. And in India, there are about 8-9 of these, 2 of which are ICAAN L roots. And all it does is to push the traffic along faster. Okay. Finally, we get to the last few slides of the presentation. As I said, the test of the multi-stakeholder model is the success in building consensus and getting from point A to point B, literally in the continuum of governance. Okay, and so when in 2014 the US government said that they would give up the oversight of the internet or the IANA functions rather, which is the numbering and naming system that ICAAN would run. It also asks ICAAN to convene a multi-stakeholder group to create an alternate sort of system to the US government, the oversight, so that both the technical part and the oversight part could be melded. So, next slide. So, pre-transition, if you look on the left-hand side, this is what ICAAN looked like in relation to the US government, which was represented by the National Telecom and Information Authority, NTIA. And post-transition, you can see on the right-hand side how it has changed with the Customer Standing Committee and an INA Functions Review system. All of this didn't just happen overnight by a few people sitting across the table and deciding. It took almost 18 months for this to develop, and how it took place is shown in the last slide. If you just jump to the last slide and come back here. Sorry, second. Yeah. So essentially the effort to get to that point took about 800 plus working hours, 33,100 plus total mailing list exchanges. 2 committees were created, the INA Stewardship Transition Coordination Group known as the ICG, and the cross-committee working group for accountability, which is shown in orange, and various meetings took place. It shows the participation across the world on the left-hand lower corner. There was strong participation from India, from civil society and government particularly, and then more than 1,100 events across the world to elicit responses. So all of this took place to create, go back to the last, this structure where ICAAN now has a post-transition INA PTI company, which is actually known as Public Technical Identifiers, PTI. There's a Customer Standing Committee, there's an INA Functions Review, and of course the relationship with IETF and all of that exists on the left-hand side. So a very complex multi-stakeholder structure has been created. Complexity is part of the multi-stakeholder model so that no single group gets undue kind of control over the process. And there are checks and balances along the way. And then, yes, so this is where we are. With that, I'll come to an end of this lecture, I suppose. And I will open the floor for questions. Go ahead.
What's been the government's response to a multi-stakeholder model, particularly
Indian government's response? So, the Indian government, it's a good question, because the Indian government is one of the earliest signatories to the United Nations system. And when it came to foreign policy and global governance issues, they very strongly support, and we continue to do, the UN system. I mean, even today you hear this whole debate about the seat, at the high table, in a sense. Okay, but in 2015, after I came on board, we had a series of parties with the Indian government, and we explained to them that it is important for the government to support the multi-stakeholder model. It's not that they didn't know about it. Of course they knew about it, but they needed to understand what is the role that they needed to play. And the government came out with a very well nuanced position. In June of 2015, the government actually said that we will support the multi-stakeholder model. In fact, that Ravi Shankar Prasad made a very sort of speech which was relayed at one of the ICAAN meetings in June 2015. So he said we would support the multi-stakeholder model. We support the multi-stakeholder model. is something that the government wanted to, have full control over, and which was absolutely fine in terms of our understanding of multi-stakeholderism. Yes.
Given that in India we have more than 10 local language domains, and the fact that the amount of users in India is increasing, and as I've mentioned that India has been involved in this for a long time, what is your comment on India's demand for a root server?
Good. I was having this conversation with Anna on the way in. So firstly, let me give you some of the parameters. So India has about 460 million odd users today, second to China, number one. Number two, we have 22 official languages. There is a committee, I'll get your root server, not to worry. But since you put so many data points in, I thought I should update you on some of the issues there. So there is a committee in place called the New Primary Generation Panel, which is working on creating input rule sets for many of these languages. They've started with Devanagari, but they'll move to various other languages or the script systems, which will address various languages, so that eventually you can have a multilingual DNS in India. Okay. So China has a Chinese DNS. The Cyrillic script, which is used in Greece, Macedonia, and some parts of Russia, has their own DNS. Okay. So all this is in development. In terms of the root server, the demand of the root server was a very it's a very emotional demand. Okay. Technology has moved on. The issue over here is what is critical infrastructure for the internet. So the demand for the root server stems from the concern, and it's a very good concern to have, that wait a minute, most of the internet's infrastructure exists outside of critical infrastructure. Because if you look at in a traditional sense, there are 13 root servers, of which I think 10 are in the US, and 2 are in Europe, and 1 is in Japan. Okay, and therefore you may feel that if we have a root server, we would be in a better place. But the way technology has, and this, by the way, this demand made a lot of sense at a certain point in time, because technology then changed or improved. Today we have something called the Anycast system, which has led to the propagation of these root servers. Actually, there are 600 root server instances in the world, and whether the number is 9 or 11, I'm not very clear at this point, because some of them may have shut down, but there are either 9 or 11 in India, 2 of which are the ICAAN's L root. Okay. Now, when you have a root server, you cannot do anything with it. There is no data, there is no content. The root server system, and that very intense slide which I put up, and I said you should blow it up on a A3 page, that tells you what happens in a root server. And there is a hyperlink there. You can go there and look at the root server file today sitting over here. So there is no secret in the root server system. Okay. So what the root server, having an instance of a root server does is it actually pushes your traffic much faster to the system. It does not necessarily conclusively tell you that if there is an internet, let's say, malware attack happening in the country, that having a root server will indicate exactly where it's coming from. Because as you would probably know, the way the internet works is by networking. So if you are sitting in this room, and let's say if I want to infect this young lady's computer, I'm not going to send it directly to her. I'm going to bounce it off 20 other servers across the globe and reach a computer. So when she tries to look for where the source of that malware is, she will go to the last one. That will lead to another one. But by the time you come back to me, it's going to take a long time. Look, my point very simply is the demand for a good server had a certain meaning at a certain time and point in history, but the world has moved on. The question should be asked today is, what needs to be done to make our internet ecosystem more robust? I think that is a question that requires more thought.
So multi-stakeholder model involves both state and non-state actors on the same pedestal as different participants. But if you look at most international policy decisions, they're made just solely by state actors. So what is so different or special about internet governance that we need a multi-stakeholder model?
So you'll have to define who you call non-state actors, because in the conventional sense, non-state actors, the term means something entirely different. So who do you mean as non-state?
Companies, the private sector.
Okay. So what is your question therefore?
That's what is so different about the area of internet governance that it requires a multi-stakeholder model?
So what is different is the rate at which technology has propagated itself has the speed at which it has happened because of the multi-stakeholder system. It's because of no government interference. Okay? Governments can make policies for their own countries, and they could have policies, India has certain policies for, let's say, for foreign affairs. India has, let's say, certain policies in home affairs. But when it comes to the internet, it is a global resource, and no one government should be able to create a policy for it. That is the ethos behind it.
I'm not talking about one government making their own policies, but if you look at the United Nations, it's about different countries coming together to make international policy decisions. So why can't something like that be followed for internet governance as well?
Because the United Nations, in its purest sense, is a one government, one vote system. It does not take into account the different stakeholders within that country. So the representation is through the nominated representative of a government. Okay. So the private sector, the academia, civil society will not get a voice there. Now the United Nations system has tried to adopt to the by creating the WISES system, which I showed you, which they did in 2003, and they've got their own system going in, which is quite useful. Okay. In fact, ICAAN supports that system also. The point I'm getting at, the pure United Nations system is equated with government representing people. The multi-stakeholder model is equated by people representing themselves in the governance of shared asset.
So once the ICAAN transition is complete, will ICAAN revenue suffer, considering its primary source of revenue is the application of IP address and money charges domains service? And if there will be a hit suffered, how will it fund such activities?
So the ICAAN transition has nothing to do with ICAAN revenue, because as you rightly said, our revenues are a residual value from the domain names which are registered. So we have two revenue sources. Okay, one is the domain name, as you know, and it's between 18 and 25 cents every time a website is renewed. So if you go online and look for our annual report, you will see that we are a 140 million USD kind of a company. It's neither here nor there. It's not huge. It's not small. But we have fixed revenue, which comes in little dribs and drabs, but we have very good results. The other source of revenue has been the new GTLD program, where, as I gave an example of .SBI, because over there what happens is you become a registry and you become a registrar. So you're taking a huge responsibility. You know, imagine a .com becoming, like SBI becoming a .com. Okay, so they can use SBI for the branches. They can have a .SBI email system. They may or may not want to have outsiders use it. So that revenue has the revenue we got from selling or allowing .SBI to be created. That revenue has gone into a pool, which the community, through the multi-stakeholder model, is deciding on how that money will be spent. Okay, so we do not have, the ICAAN transition has not led to any depletion.
So I'm going to take you back to the internet root zone again.
Yes.
There is a demand, okay, so I'm drawing this from a study by the Techlaw Foundation a couple of years ago, and there was a perception that there is a strong trust deficit when it comes to how ICAAN administers the root zone. So, especially from the third world, especially from Afro-Asian countries,
Yes.
there's been a demand that the internet root zone be renamed or be reconceptualized as a common heritage of the mankind. Something like how we treat the high seas and outer space right now, which is essentially everyone will leave it alone and everyone will minimally regulate it, and it will not be monopolized by one entity such as ICAAN or one entity and its nominees.
Yeah.
So is there an ICAAN response to whether the internet root zone should be conceptualized as...
So let's go back to the root zone. I wish all of you could see this clearly. One of the biggest criticism that ICAAN had for the longest time was that it was not inclusive enough, that the technology that runs the internet was not easily understood. Exactly what you said. Particularly third world countries, developing countries, felt that there is something that they were missing out on, and that's where we started the process to educate people on the root zone system, and this is the best we can do in an A3 page in English language and not technical speak. But if you go through this, it will tell you about the process. The purpose of one of the reasons why I come out to do this interaction is to get this question and hopefully to send you to this page. Okay, this is one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is the basis of the internet is oneness. And as I said earlier, you can create your own internet in this classroom. I mean, my tech guys can come here and do, create a network between all these laptops in this room, and you can be sending and receiving messages. So everyone is free to do that. But if the common heritage and all of that sounds very, very romantic. But the fact is, technology is technology. Now, the way to participate in understanding and contributing to the process of how this technology is run and maintained is, now let's go back to 2 or 3 slides previous to this. Stop here. This is why, when I said there were 3 Indian nationals who are now on the Root Server System Advisory Committee, it was one of my KRAs to get 3 Indians, because the government of India had the same question. उसमें है क्या? क्यों दिखाई नहीं देता? What is there that we can't see? So you have to participate in the process. If you don't participate, you will always it will always look remote. Okay. It is a participatory model, and both the Security and Stability Advisory Committee and the RSAP are open to participation by qualified professionals. Okay. These are all voluntary positions. So, which also means that people need to have the time and inclination to participate. So one of the challenges of the multi-stakeholder model is this. Nobody pays you to participate. Okay. So you have to figure out how you're going to have the resources. So in terms of, in conclusion, my response is yes, for the longest time ICANN didn't do a good enough job in explaining how the zone system works. Because for a year and a half, that's the only question I got in every government meeting I went. And one of the things that I did at one of the ICANN meetings, so we have 3 public meetings a year, but at a meeting last year, I took India's National Security, Deputy National Security Advisor and the Cyber Security Coordinator, Dr. Bhushan Rai, into private meetings with the RSAC and SSAC committees so that he could get a full sense of what this is about. So we need to do more education for people to understand, but it's a system that works, okay, and it's best not to tinker too much with it.
I just have 2 more follow-up questions.
I have all evening, so I leave it to all of you. Yeah, sure.
Bala, Benjamin, anyone else? We'll just collect questions quickly. Bala and then...
Okay.
One over there.
Just, I think these are also going to be questions that you would be expecting. One, is the claim that the internet is unitarily still standing given what's happening in China, given that there already has been some movement towards fragmentation? 2, is there an official ICANN response to the criticism with respect to how inclusive this process is? The process in which it engages with the community with respect to how inclusive are the mailing lists, who makes most interventions. Is that a truly democratic process, or is there more to be done?
It is always open to question, and I think one of the best quality of inquiry that the ICANN system has received has been from CIS, Center for Internet and Society, right? In Bangalore. They have really come up at us with a lot of questions, which has helped improve our quality of internet, the multi-stakeholder process. Okay. They have, for example, one of the questions they asked us 2 years ago, and Sunil Abraham is very simplistic and naive in his approach, but it's very powerful. He said that why doesn't ICANN put up all details of its revenues? What is there to hide? We said there's nothing to hide, but the fact is you have hundreds of revenue sources of, let's say, $500. There are thousands of $100, $1,000. Now, we file taxes as per the law required in the US, and that information is available. But he said, no, as a stakeholder, I want to know all the details. We're actually working on it. But by later this year, we will have every year, all revenue sources available. So my point simply is that you need to work, you need to challenge us, you need to question us to make us work better. That's answer to question number 2. Question number 1 was China, and I would not comment on that. Fragmentation is possible. It is a national policy of some countries to allow or not allow, how the internet works. So those are, sovereign issues, so we don't comment on that. He's on camera. Yes.
I was wondering, why was it that the INA transition, moving away from governmental oversight or control, took so long? Isn't it kind of troubling that the government had a hand in this for so long?
That's an excellent question. So, if you go back to the origins of ICANN, there is something known as a white paper, and you can again find it online. And when ICANN was conceived, the thought was it will take 2-3 years for the institution to mature and stabilize. And once when the US government kind of felt that it was mature and stable, that they would hand over the system. For whatever reason, and much of it could be political or otherwise, that process took a long time to happen. I think 3-4 years ago, the world was at an inflection. The internet governance was at an inflection point that either multi-stakeholderism succeeds and IANA transition happens, or the internet gets fragmented. I think we came to that point. We did come to that point, and that's, and therefore the transition took place, and even the process of the transition, what is the right model? I mean, I've just paraphrased it in a 2 or 3 slides, and I took like 6 minutes to tell you about it, but this was a very painful process. There were participants from all over the globe, including India, who were participating at their own will, and giving comments, participating, giving interjections, sometimes fighting. Finally, a model emerged. So it's a painful process. Multi-stakeholderism is not some quote-unquote sexy kind of a thing that, it's great to be multi-stakeholder. It's not, it doesn't happen so easily. There's a lot of work that goes in.
Speaking of participation, just deviating a bit from what was earlier said, my question would be, since you have mentioned multi-stakeholder, for the common person, what is the stake that they have with respect to this? What say do they have, and for what reason would they have such a say in this?
So let's stay in India only. Okay, where do you hail from?
Mizoram.
So let's go to Mizoram, and let's go to a village in Mizoram, and let's say you show up there with a smartphone, and you start using the internet, and let's say there's somebody in that village, and he or she says to you that, wait a minute, why can't I use this thing? What do I need to have to use this thing? This phone is just an object. I mean, it's a connectivity tool. Okay? How can I use this just the way you are using it? Why should I not be able to do it? From there, the demand can become, how can I earn revenue from this? Okay? Now, all these questions are questions that users should be asking, and there need to be a process through which it comes into mainstream. So typically, this process in the traditional sense was mandated, it was under the government's remit. Now, how many things do you expect the government to do? The government will provide education, it will provide subsidized food, subsidized education. It may not be able to do everything all the time in the same way. So this is where multi-stakeholderism comes into play. This is where organizations such as the Internet Society or the Computer Society of India can play a role in policy development. And this is where, this is the reason I gave you this example, is this is how we're working with local community to develop, the Mizo script to be used. And why is it important? Because you may be able to bring or memorialize a lot of your literature, for example. There is a practical part and there is a heritage part also. Are we done?
Mr. Tech, we shall continue the informal session for anyone who has questions. In the interest of time, we'll continue the informal session for anyone who has questions. But thank you, sir, for taking the time from your busy schedule to come down.